Willis's office has been investigating Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election in Georgia for more than 2 years now. And 2 days ago, we learned that yet another one of Trump's lawyers may be a target in that investigation. That followed reports that at least 9 of Trump's 16 fake electors from Georgia have been granted immunity in the investigation, and they are cooperating with prosecutors. The rest of those fake electors, including the chairman of the Republican Party of Georgia, they presumably remain targets of the investigation. So Fani Willis appears to be casting a very wide net here, looking at not only the big fish, but all the little fish who could potentially flip and testify against others. But would indicting any of those targets, even America's mayor, Rudy Giuliani, would that cause such a massive public backlash that you literally have to clear the streets and the courts for it? All of the signs here point to the architect of the big lie being held to account at some point between the end of July and the first 3 weeks of August. Mark your calendars. Joining us now are former U.S. Attorney for the Middle District of Georgia, Michael Moore, and Katie Phang, host of the eponymous Katie Phang Show right here on MSNBC. Katie, let me start with you. Sure. It's a delight to see you in person. Same here. Nobody is misreading this, right? All the arrows, it's a neon sign rather than an arrow, points to a Donald Trump indictment between the end of July and the first 3 weeks of August. Is that right?
Remember the forewoman from the special grand jury. Yes. What did she say? It's not rocket science. So if it's not rocket science, then you're not going to be shocked, is what she says. I guess we're not going to be shocked.
I mean, the forewoman aside, and I think there was a lot of psychology going on with that forewoman.
Sure.
This is a very big fish in the sea of fishes in and around the attempts to undermine the results of the 2020 election. Donald Trump is a big deal if that is, in fact, what is happening. From the sort of breadcrumbs that we have gotten in recent weeks, from the fake electors who now have immunity deals with prosecutors and are cooperating, the lawyers that have been implicated, just the movement and momentum that we are seeing, what is your expectation here? And how potentially damning is it that you have these cooperating witnesses?
So it's reading tea leaves, as you said.
Yeah.
But I do think that reasonable prosecutors would say that in light of the background of Fani Willis being an expert in RICO and racketeering prosecutions, and because we've seen a wide net cast, a lot of people forget this has been going on for 2 years.
Yeah.
The investigation has had 2 years to be able to grow. It is only lately that you've seen an escalation and yet a pullback. The pullback being the immunity deals that were offered with 8 of the 16 fake electors that participated in that December 2020 meeting wherein they refused to certify the Biden, win. I think you see the possibility that, I mean, if we're going to temper expectations, which we should do when we're lawyers, it should be Donald Trump, right? But it could also mean Mark Meadows, who was on that famous phone call to Brad Raffensperger, find me 11,780 votes. I mean, it could go as high as Mark Meadows, right? But the reality is, if you have a puppeteer, if you have somebody who set it all in motion, like any good racketeering prosecution, it's going to be the highest guy on the totem pole, and that's Donald Trump. The immunity deals in and of themselves are kind of big flags for us to be looking at, and yet they're just part of the process. They're just a part of how you tee up an investigation and a prosecution. But knowing her background, her being Fani Willis, knowing that we're asking for the security, it's kind of a foregone conclusion, in my opinion. You're going to see Donald Trump on that indictment.
Michael, you're a creature of Georgia. The requests that are being made from the DA's office in terms of the courts clearing their schedules, the remote work for the prosecutors in her office, the security concerns in this very specific window of time. Have you ever seen anything like this in your time as an attorney?
I have not. I'm glad to be with you both. I do think this is just odd. It's just a little weird to do this. I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, you talk about hooking the big fish. I mean, most of the time, if you're going to hook the big fish, you don't shout about it on top of the water with a megaphone. And so that seems to be sort of what she's doing here. A lot of these arrangements could have been handled privately and quietly. I mean, the district attorney's office itself is not very far from the chief judge's office, and you can walk down there and sit down and say, this is what's fixing to happen. Can you call the judges together and, let them know what's going on, or we're going to be appearing before the grand jury. You can talk to the head of security. You can talk to the police chief. You don't have to do all this by way of some kind of public announcement. So it is strange, and it tells me basically that She's conscious of the fact that she needs to produce after 2 years of investigation, and I think that she's producing in the public eye so they could see that she's doing that, that she hadn't wasted time and money on it. And I think you're going to see Trump indicted. I don't think there's any possible way that she's going to now get around that after all this sort of unnecessary fanfare. I mean, there's some value to a prosecutor in sort of coming in under the cloak of darkness and nabbing your man, so to speak, and running in with an indictment that was kept very quiet, but was returned by a grand jury and announcing it in public the next day. I mean, there's a lot of value to that. So it sounds like she's looking at a big RICO case. It sounds like she's been weaving this net, to try to circle up all the fish in the pond. Again, sometimes the bigger the net you weave, the more likely you are to tangle yourself up in it. So there's some pros and cons to doing it that way. But wouldn't be surprised to see an indictment.
Michael, that's a really good point. I mean, just the style of the wind-up, if you will, to use a baseball metaphor, is radically different than, Katie, what we've seen from Jack Smith, right?
Yeah, and Michael makes an exceptional point here. There is a pending motion that has been filed by Donald Trump that has not been ruled on yet. And I actually have the state's response that was just filed on May 15th. And what Trump is saying, and another one of those fake electors is saying, is, look, this is so unusual. This entire special grand jury looks like it's already biased and tainted. And this whole process seems to already be skewed. And then to Michael's point, the more unusual it is, that feeds into the narrative of Donald Trump that this is just a witch hunt. This is just the politicization of a law enforcement arm. And so if you're going to have this much of a preview of what that movie is, it better be a blockbuster.
Right.
And to Michael's point, it hopefully is a blockbuster because everyone should be held accountable. We've heard Fani Willis say, no one is above the law. We've heard many prosecutors and DAs say that. And if it's true, then Donald Trump should also be on.